It's been 6 months since we built our biggest project. If you haven't watched the first part, the idea was to create a small ecosystem where different land and water inhabitants could coexist together. And now you'll see what happened to the lizards, ants, and prehistoric shield bugs that were already living in our terrarium. You'll find out what challenges we faced and what new inhabitants we introduced there. And now you will see what happened to the lizards, ants, and prehistoric shield bugs that already lived in our terrarium. Find out what difficulties we faced and what new inhabitants we settled there. Right after we finished setting up the terrarium 6 months ago, everything was fine with the above ground part, but there were definitely issues with the water body. Within a couple of days, the clear water we had poured in turned murky with a yellow-brown tint. The reason for the water darkening turned out to be the driftwood. Usually, before putting them in the aquarium, the driftwood is boiled in salty water for a few days. This removes all the coloring pigments and also the microorganisms that, by the way, caused the water to become murky. But this didn't surprise us at all. In any new aquarium, this is the initial picture. After all, for the good bacteria that clean the water to reproduce, a couple of weeks need to pass. But we decided to speed up the water purification process a bit. First, we added these black pebbles that look like coal to the aquarium filter. This thing is called shungite, a natural mineral that cleans water very well from harmful impurities and bacteria. We just spread the second half of the shungite around the aquarium. To further reduce the number of harmful microorganisms and clean up the water, we added a water conditioner. This aquarium dye not only kills bacteria but also colors the water a cool blue, although it fades pretty quickly and restores the water's clarity. Already after a day the water became much clearer. Although it fades pretty quickly and restores the water's clarity, already after a day the water became much clearer. But in the relatively clean water, a new problem became apparent. Our beautiful driftwood was covered with a thick layer of disgusting slime. This slime was only on the driftwood, and as it turned out, it was nothing more than a colony of hundreds of billions of bacteria that are involved in establishing balance in the aquarium. All that was left to do was just wait for the balance to be established in the aquarium. Meanwhile, our forest skinks continued to thrive on land. Every few days we fed them cockroaches. And you know, it seems clear now why such unremarkable grey lizards are kept at home. Unlike our banana eater, who sits still for hours and sometimes turns up his nose at food, these lizards are very active and can hunt for themselves. Look how they pounce on their prey. And now remember how it was with Lilu. Agile lizards easily tear apart cockroaches that are larger than themselves. Sometimes they even fight over food. The lizard that first caught the cockroach lost it to a more agile lizard. Wild lizards persist, so it chased to reclaim its food. However, the sneaky lizard hid between rocks, making it impossible to find. We gave the deceived lizard another chance by releasing a cockroach into the terrarium. But after stealing the prey, the sneaky lizard hid between the rocks, and she was nowhere to be found. Of course, we gave the deceived lizard a second chance and released a cockroach into the terrarium for her. She pursued him for quite a long time on land and even near water. But in the end, she managed to get a bite to eat. Weeks went by and not so pleasant things started happening with our terrarium. For New Year, we went to another city, and during that time, the forest moss and the very finicky myrtle tree completely dried out from lack of moisture. We couldn't leave the terrarium like that, so we got to work on completely revamping it. The lizards certainly didn't like this news. Of course, they had been studying the map of the world they lived in for several months, just getting used to it. And now the developers were releasing a major update. One lizard even made herself a little cave under a layer of moss right where the dry tree stood. It's sad, of course, that it had to be thrown away. To avoid accidentally burying the lizards under the layer of soil, we had to catch all 3 of them and take them out of the terrarium. And it took a bit more time than we expected. I even had to put down the camera and help my partner catch them. We removed the entire top layer of moss and even the little stream made of pebbles. Next, we had to put all our landscape design skills to work and prepare the area for planting new vegetation. By the way, along with the new soil we brought for planting, earthworms ended up in the terrarium. Of course, we didn't throw them out, as they provide significant benefits by aerating the soil and improving its quality as they pass through it. This time, we decided not to cover the terrarium with moss, but to sow it with thousands of meadowgrass seeds. We moistened the seeds according to the instructions and covered them with a couple of centimeters of soil. Already after a day, dozens of tiny sprouts were rising above the soil. But these are definitely not our seeds. They were already in the soil. By that time, the lizards had already gotten used to the new setup of their home. They might have even dug themselves little caves again. A couple of days later, our planted seeds sprouted. Here are 5 types of plants that together create a pleasant-looking lawn. By the way, along with them, some kind of strange little root that we brought with the soil has also started to sprout leaves. But let's get back to the water. In a month, the water became almost perfectly clear and the slime covering the driftwood completely disappeared. But upon closer inspection of the driftwood, we noticed another problem. It was completely covered with hordes of tiny snails. And actually, we brought them in ourselves, along with the plants and while relocating the shield bugs. These snails seem to be parasites, and over time they will overrun our aquarium and ruin all the plants. This prospect did not make us happy at all. But catching 100 snails out of there is no easy task either. Thanks to the subscribers who suggested an interesting way to solve this problem. But more on that later. To start with, we bought a variety of aquarium plants and planted them in the aquatic part of the terrarium. Some of the plants we saw for the first time, and planting them wasn't easy at all. Some branches of certain species didn't have roots, so we had to tie little stones to their stems to keep them from floating and then bury them in the substrate. Of course, we stirred up a bunch of debris from the bottom and really clouded the water, but after a few hours, everything returned to normal. Almost crystal clear water and beautiful aquarium plants. Finally, everything is as it should be. We thought so until we accidentally noticed some uninvited guests in our terrarium. They're so tiny that they're almost invisible. Try to spot them? Here they are, the tiniest white worms crawling on the glass. And it seems these creatures are called nematodes. They were less than a millimeter long, and we probably brought them in with the plants or maybe with the soil that accidentally got into the water. As we found out, they shouldn't cause any harm. On the contrary, they are sometimes intentionally introduced as food for fry of aquarium fish, so we decided not to disturb them and left them alone. Now let's get back to the snails. There were already at least a couple of hundred of them on the walls, decorations and plants. And to solve the problem with the snails, we bought more snails. No, seriously, we only bought a couple of snails. And these good snails will help us in the fight against the hordes of harmful ones. This is a Helena snail. She's a predator, and her food happens to be our tiny snails. 2 such predatory snails should bring the population of herbivores under control in a couple of months. Here, Helena has found her prey. She's very slowly getting closer, gently touching it with her antenna. That's it for her, and she pauses for a brief moment as if contemplating, maybe this snail is too big for her. Alright, there's a tiny mollusk on the horizon. And here's a herbivorous snail of a different species. And this behavior repeated itself dozens of times. Maybe our Helens are vegans. They're crawling right among their prey. And instead of grabbing it and sucking it out of the shell, they decide to ride on top of it. Yes, exactly like that. This little snail is literally riding on top of the predatory, ruthless snails. Although they were probably more interested in finding each other in our aquarium and then laying eggs. They were in transparent bags, hanging on the driftwood, and so tiny that I barely noticed them there. If all goes well, within a few weeks a few new predatory snails will hatch. And it's a good thing they reproduce much slower than the herbivores, otherwise we would have to get someone else to eat them. We'll come back to the aquarium later, but how are things going underground? How is the ant colony doing? If you remember, we have 2 of them and one lives in a separate farm. During this time, the colony has grown quite a bit, and we, as promised, taught the ants to take out the trash to the garbage pile. It's easier than it seems. All you have to do is wait for the new colony to make a trash pile in the arena and then move it to a special trash container. It was sent to us along with the farm. The ants will smell where the trash can is now and will start throwing their waste there, making it much easier for us to clean up. Everything was great with this colony until one day the ants took their queen out to the trash. One day I couldn't find her in the chambers of the farm and thought she had died. And since the ants throw their dead relatives out with the waste to the trash, I found her right there. They dismembered her and carried the pieces to the container. Maybe it was an ant revolution, but most likely we just did something wrong. Maybe we disturbed the ants too often by moving the farm around or constantly turning the lights on and off. But in any case, without a queen and without new workers, the colony will slowly fade away. And eventually, maybe in a few months or even a year, it will disappear. This colony needed a new queen. They sent her to us along with a few larvae that she had. But if we put her with our ants now, the queen will undoubtedly be seen as an enemy, and within a couple of minutes, she'll be sent back to where she came from. To prevent that from happening, we made an amazing move. We took some baby oil and smeared it around the top of a large cup. The ants won't be able to cross the greased area, so they won't escape from there. That's where we moved all our ants. It was very easy to do because after the queen died, we stopped moistening the chambers of the farm and the ants moved out of there into this wooden house. We carefully shook them out of there and moved the remaining ant formicarium into the cup with a cotton swab. They were calmly crawling on the glass of the cup, but the strip of oil turned out to be insurmountable for them. Why did we put the ants in the cup? We drowned them. We poured water over them and gently stirred with a stick until the last one stopped showing signs of life. Then we filtered the ants through a cloth so that they all ended up together in the air. But you didn't think we killed the ants, did you? Of course we wouldn't kill them. Look, within a minute, the first one started to wake up and then more and more ants began to straighten their antennae. Before they completely scattered, we quickly moved them into this transparent cube. This is a starter home for a small colony of ants. The idea is to attach 2 test tubes with ants to it. But we will only use it to introduce a new queen to our old colony. So, we just put a little sand at the bottom, plugged one opening with cotton, and used the other test tube for water. But why did we drown our ants, you might ask? The thing is, when ants drown and shut down, they undergo a sort of reset and they forget which ant is their brother and which one is a stranger. And so, everyone around them should be accepted as friends, including the new queen. We cautiously placed her with the workers and she immediately started to panic and run around the arena. And so, everyone around them should be accepted as friends, including the new queen. We cautiously placed her with the workers and she immediately started to panic and run around the arena. And she even bit one ant by its antenna. We were really scared because we thought the workers would attack the queen. But now it's clear that she herself poses a danger to them. We strongly advise against repeating this method, because even with the advice of experienced ant farmers, the chance of success is very small, and the workers will most likely kill the queen. But we were very lucky, and the ants accepted the new queen as their own. They've been living like this for several weeks now, and soon we will move them back to their big home. But what happened to the colony that we placed in the big terrarium? Here we see that the ants have set up some kind of garden. Green grass is growing everywhere. These gardeners have buried seeds of the lawn grass that we planted on top. And from the moisture, it sprouted here. But where is the whole colony? Just 2 weeks after settling in, the ants realized that they didn't want to live like this. In just a few days, they chewed a tunnel into the gypsum deep into the terrarium and went to live in the ground, just like in nature. Although we often see them crawling in the gypsum form near the glass that we made for them, and sometimes even the queen herself crawls out here. We decided to introduce some pretty nice neighbors for the ants deep in the ground. We bought a colony of pill bugs because they are probably the best cleaners for terrariums. By eating leftover food, mold, fungi, dead plant parts, and other debris, they clean and purify the terrarium. Carefully cutting out a square of soil and disturbing an earthworm, we poured our pill bugs into the resulting hole. By the way, we also introduced some wood lice along with them. They are also useful and perform the same functions as the pill bugs. But to our surprise, along with the pill bugs and wood lice, this centipede also fell out of the jar. It turned out that this little guy is called a centipede, and he also feeds on all sorts of rotten debris. By the way, we managed to find out that he is armed with smelly and tear-producing chemicals, so it is unlikely that our lizards will want to eat him. But the Macreans, which also reproduce quite quickly, can easily be eaten by both lizards and ants. Perhaps soon the terrarium will exist on its own, like a real ecosystem, and we will not have to feed the lizards cockroaches. But then we'll have to introduce something similar in the water part of the terrarium. Because we introduced 2 crayfish and several genetically modified fish there. Previously, these were the most ordinary fish, but scientists changed their DNA, adding a gene that makes them glow under ultraviolet light. They are quite bright and beautiful, and that's why we chose them. Fish, and especially crayfish, are very sensitive to sudden changes in temperature and water composition, so we introduced them just as slowly and carefully as we did with our isopods back then. If you're introducing inhabitants into your aquarium for the first time, here's a guide on how to do it right. First, you place the bag in the aquarium and just wait. In about half an hour, the temperatures in the bag and the aquarium should equalize completely. Then you open or cut the bag and gradually add some water from the aquarium into it. And after a few minutes, you can already release the critters into their new home. The released fish immediately formed a school while the crayfish began to assess our aquarium setup skills. There was nothing they couldn't lift with their claws. You can definitely understand them. Their aquarium in the pet store was far from interesting, and they lived there all alone, not even with any fish. Maybe it's because they might start catching them. Although the seller said that the crayfish are too slow to be able to catch the agile fish, and therefore there is no need to worry about them. Although it is very hard to believe that these underwater cockroaches will not one day eat the fish swimming under their noses. They literally put everything that comes their way into their mouths. One time I was shocked to see a crayfish finishing off a cockroach. He accidentally fell into the water and drowned. Apparently he was trying to escape from the lizards, but even there predators caught up with him. And this is despite the fact that we regularly fed the crayfish special food and even a delicacy like bloodworms. These are the little red worms. If you remember, we also fed our scuds with them. And we also occasionally noticed one strange thing in their behavior. So, the crayfish is just crawling along, minding its own business, and suddenly starts scratching its eyes. It looks very unusual. Let me know in the comments if you know why they do that. A few hours after introducing the crayfish, our perfectly clean water started to look like this because they dug everything up in search of food. Over time, this cloudiness should settle in the filter, and the crayfish, having explored their new apartment, will stop digging so actively. And yes, after a few days, the water almost returned to its perfect state. But one of the crayfish was sitting in a hidden spot and hardly moving. We immediately noticed that there was some strange something lying nearby. If you're a subscriber, you might have guessed this is a crayfish exoskeleton. Crustaceans carry their bones outside their bodies. Crayfish occasionally outgrow and shed their shells for new ones. During this vulnerable period, their new shell hasn't hardened and they might be bothered by others. Sometimes they eat their old shell to use its nutrients for growing new armor. During this period, our crayfish is very vulnerable because its new shell hasn't hardened yet and another crayfish might start bothering it. Sometimes it comes out to quietly eat its old shell, using the nutrients from it to quickly grow a new armor. But then it will become even bigger and stronger than its relative that hasn't molted yet. Sometimes it comes out to quietly eat its old shell, using the nutrients from it to quickly grow a new armor, but then it will become even bigger and stronger than its relative that hasn't molted yet. A week later, we found another shell, which meant that both crayfish were the same size again. So, right now in our terrarium, we have 13 aquatic and 8 terrestrial plant species coexisting, at least 2 species of herbivorous and 1 species of predatory aquatic snails, 2 species of fish, at least 2 species of worms, 1 species of lizards, and 5 species of arthropods. And surely there are thousands of species of bacteria, amoebas, and all those things that you can't see with the naked eye. And now is the perfect time to say a huge thank you to those people who watched this video from the beginning to this point. I've never had to edit such a large amount of material before. This is a new record. We really hope you didn't find it too boring to watch such a long video. Maybe in a few months, we will be able to make our huge terrarium self-sustaining without our intervention. It's quite large and shouldn't be too difficult to achieve. Well, probably. If you are still interested in this project, please let us know by liking or commenting. And if you want, send this video to your friends. That's the most valuable thing you can do for us. Oh, and yes, we're waiting for the experts in the comments who will write again that our lizards will die without ultraviolet light. Of course, we've long since bought both ultraviolet and infrared lamps, and we turn them on alternately. So give us a thumbs up and make sure you're subscribed to the channel, and then there will be even more videos like this.